The Iron Balance Dojo sat quiet in the middle of a sleepy Dallas suburb, nestled between a shuttered laundromat and an old diner that still served black coffee for $1. Its windows were always fogged in the morning, as if the building breathed slowly with the people inside. The sign was simple: gold letters on dark wood, worn just enough to suggest time and care. Inside, the mats were always clean. The air held a faint trace of incense mixed with the rubbery scent of souls and sweat. A steady rhythm of breath and movement guided the place like a quiet drumbeat. Master Donovan moved like water. He spoke little, but when he did, the room softened around his words. He had that kind of presence that made even grown men shift their posture when he entered. Most of the students were adults: office workers, former athletes, and a few first responders. They bowed when they came in, bowed when they left, and tried to leave the world behind when they stepped barefoot onto the mat. Then there was Eli Shaw, 11 years old, thin as a twig hair, always falling into his eyes, wearing a gi too big for his frame. He trained in silence, not because he was shy, but because the noise of the place didn't seem made for someone like him. He wasn't bad, far from it. He had a way of moving that made people look twice, like his body already knew something his mind was still catching up to. But that didn't matter to Coach Travis. Travis had the voice of a man who liked being heard. He barked corrections like commands, paced with his arms behind his back, and didn't believe in second chances. His belt was black, his stare even darker. To the adults, he was tolerable. Necessary, maybe. The kind of strict teacher who pushed people just far enough to call it growth. To Eli, he was something else entirely. The boy tried to follow the patterns. Breath in, step forward, block. Again. The elbows are tight, the back is straight, and the weight is low. But his body remembered a different rhythm. One morning they were drilling combinations. Step in block counter. Travis moved through the line like a judge, pausing behind each student for a moment before moving on. When he reached Eli, he stopped. The room went quiet. Just the hum of the ceiling fan and the muffled sound of feet sliding on the mat. "Do it again," Travis said. Eli did. Blocked low. Shifted weight brought his elbow in and stepped back just slightly off pattern. It was smoother, more circular, like a motion he'd practiced before, but not here. "That's wrong," Travis snapped. Eli froze, eyes flicking to Master Donovan across the room. The old man watched, but didn't move. His hands were folded. His face was unreadable. Travis stepped closer. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice sharp enough to cut. Eli said nothing, just looked down. Travis waited 2 seconds too long. Then came the worst part. The mocking tone. "Of course. You think you're special. You think you know better than everyone else." Eli's hands curled at his sides. Not in anger, not in fear, just in quiet confusion. Travis stepped forward again. This time he didn't yell. He lowered his voice like a threat in the dark. "Try it again. The right way." Eli moved, but again the step was different. Softer, less force, more flow. That was when it happened. A slap. Not hard enough to bruise, but loud enough to steal the sound out of the room. It wasn't the first time Travis had gotten too close to the line, but something at that moment made the dojo go still. Eli didn't cry. He didn't back away. He looked up at Travis, face flushed, one cheek glowing pink. And then he said 5 words. My dad showed me this. Everything stopped. Even Donovan across the mat blinked. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence wrapped itself around those words like they were sacred or dangerous. Travis opened his mouth, but no sound came out, because everyone heard what wasn't said. And something in the air shifted. The dojo had rules: discipline, order, respect. But that moment hung heavy like the breath before a storm. And just like that, the stillness had a name. Eli Shaw, the boy who didn't fit, the boy with a quiet fire. And somewhere in the silence, something new had begun. Eli didn't look back when he left the mat. His bare feet moved across the hardwood floor without a sound, each step carrying the weight of too many eyes. The silence followed him even after the door closed. Outside, the heat clung to everything. The sun was dropping low, and the sky had that soft orange glow that made shadows stretch long across the parking lot. Eli walked past the line of cars and sat beneath the oak tree near the edge of the lot. It was old. Thick roots, wide trunk branches that reached out like arms trying to hold the world. He sat with his knees pulled close back against the bark hands resting in his lap. He wasn't crying, not really. His face was red, not just from the sun, but also from something deeper. That strange ache kids get when the world doesn't make sense and grown-ups act like it does. He kept replaying it. The look on Coach Travis's face, the way his voice felt sharp like it wanted to cut something out of him. The sting on his cheek had already faded, but the heat inside hadn't. Eli watched an ant crawl over his shoe. It moved in a straight line like it had somewhere to be. He didn't. He just wanted the ground to feel solid again. A breeze passed through the tree, gentle like someone whispering just out of reach. Eli closed his eyes. He didn't want to be seen right now, not like this. A few minutes passed, maybe more. The sky deepened into purple, and the lot grew quieter. Inside the dojo, the class had moved on. He could still hear the soft thud of movement, the sharp commands, the steady rhythm. Then he heard it. The sound of tires on gravel. Not fast, not loud, just steady. He opened his eyes and looked up. The truck was old paint worn at the edges, engine low like a steady growl. It pulled in slowly the way it always did. The door creaked open. Chuck Norris stepped out. Not like a hero in a movie. Just a man. Worn boots, jeans with dust on the knees, a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. His face was calm. Calm in a way that made people notice. He didn't say anything right away. Just walked over steps, even stopping a few feet from the tree. He looked at his son. Eli didn't move. Chuck didn't crouch. Didn't reach out. He waited. Eli's voice came softly, barely loud enough to carry. He hit me for doing what you taught. Chuck didn't flinch. For a moment, nothing moved between them but the air. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't light. It just was. Then Chuck sat down, slowly, without a word. He leaned against the other side of the tree, back to the bark, eyes looking out at the horizon like it had something to say. His hands rested on his knees, fingers loose, shoulders relaxed. Eli looked over, not sure what he expected. His dad just breathed. Steady, unshaken. They sat like that for a long time. Father and son. One is trying to make sense of the world the other already knows some things can't be explained right away. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt safe, like a pause that didn't need filling. Eli finally leaned his head against the trunk. Chuck didn't speak, but something in the way he sat said enough. He'd heard him. All of it. The words and the hurt behind them. There would be time to talk later. Time to sort things out if they needed sorting. But for now, this was enough. The boy who didn't fit, and the father who saw him. Sitting under a tree as the sky turned dark. The door opened with a soft creak that no one noticed at first. Just the sound of wood giving way to the evening air. A few students kept moving through their drills. Their focus narrowed to the rhythm of repetition. Then someone looked up. He stepped inside like he belonged there. Not with swagger, not with noise. Just quiet presence, steady and still. His boots made a dull sound against the entry mat. Dust clung to the edges of his jeans. He paused for half a second, eyes scanning the room, calm and unreadable. The energy shifted. Not suddenly, not with panic. Just a slow ripple like a wave moving under the surface. One by one, bodies turned toward him. They didn't know his name. Not all of them. But they knew something. It was in the way he stood, the way the room seemed to breathe differently now. Coach Travis saw him last. He turned chest-lifted voice already rising in preparation for control. Then he stopped mid-step like a dog that smelled something it couldn't explain. Chuck said nothing. He walked across the floor with the same rhythm he used on dirt roads and ranger stations. Gravity worked the same way, no matter where he went. His eyes moved once across the line of students, then rested on Donovan near the far wall. Master Donovan did not smile. He didn't frown either. His eyes narrowed but only slightly, like he recognized something without needing to name it. Chuck stopped a few feet in from the door. He stood with his hands loose at his sides. He didn't bow. He didn't need to. He spoke softly. "Would it be right if I watched?" The words came low, smooth, nothing forced, but they landed heavily. Travis stepped forward. His movements were sharper now, a little quicker than before, like someone trying to hold a leash on something bigger than himself. "This is a private class, sir. I'd appreciate it if you waited outside." Chuck didn't move, didn't blink. "I'm here for my son." His voice didn't change, but it didn't need to. The silence that followed said more than anything else in the room. Travis hesitated, then looked around. No one met his eyes. Even the adult students had gone, still waiting like people do before a storm. They didn't know the story, but they could feel its shape. Master Donovan stepped forward. Just one step. He gave the smallest nod. Let him stay. Travis didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to being corrected in front of others. His shoulders tensed. Chuck's gaze settled on him, quiet and steady. Not challenging, just present. Like a mountain that never needed to raise its voice to block the road. Travis finally nodded. "Fine. You can watch from there." He pointed toward the wall, the far end of the room. A place where people usually sat to tie their belts or wait for their turn. Chuck walked to it without a word. The students parted as he passed. Not on purpose. It just happened, like air making room for something heavier. He took a seat on the bench hands resting on his thighs. His eyes never left the mat. Class resumed, but it wasn't the same. Movements felt stiffer. Breath caught short. People checked their stances twice. Even Travis spoke with less bite, each command trimmed down, softened at the edge. Chuck said nothing. Not once. But he saw everything. Eli wasn't there. Everyone knew that. No one said why. And still every strike that landed, every step that missed its mark, felt like it echoed in the space between them. Between the man who said little and the room that suddenly had too much to say. Travis tried to keep his rhythm, tried to move like the class was still his. But something in him was off now. His steps are less sharp. His words were thinner. Because no matter what he did, that presence in the corner stayed the same. Still, quiet, unmoved. And every time he glanced at the bench, Chuck was already watching. Not with anger, not with judgment, just calm. Like a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything and too much strength to need to prove it. The room kept moving, but the balance had shifted. Everyone felt it, even the ones who didn't understand why. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had weight. And that weight sat on the edge of the mat in worn boots and steady breath, watching without a word. Chuck Norris hadn't raised a hand. But the dojo no longer belonged to Travis. Not completely. Not anymore. Chuck didn't shift in his seat. His hands stayed still on his thighs, fingers relaxed back straight, but never rigid. He looked like he'd been sitting there for hours, or like he could sit there for 100 more. Across the mat, the class moved through a new sequence. Step in twist strike. Reset. Again. But something had changed. Students moved more slowly. Some glanced sideways when they thought no one would notice. Even their breathing sounded different, offbeat, uncertain. Travis raised his voice. He barked the commands sharply now, each syllable clipped. His steps across the mat grew faster, his heels hitting harder, as if he were trying to stamp out whatever had crept in with the man on the bench. "Focus up," he snapped. "Let's go. You train like this, you fight like this." No one answered. They just kept moving, some stiffer than before. Chuck didn't blink. His eyes tracked every movement, not judging, just watching, like he was collecting pieces of something bigger than what anyone else saw. Travis kept glancing over. Quick looks at first, like checking the time, then longer still. His mouth tightened. Shoulders started to rise. He clapped his hands together. Twice. Loud. I said again, "Start from the top. Move like it matters." The class reset. Again. But the weight in the room didn't budge, because Chuck was still there, not saying a word, not giving a look, just sitting in that same seat, letting the silence stretch long and wide. Travis tried again. He walked the line, calling out corrections. He adjusted stances, lifted elbows, and swatted knees. His voice got sharper. His hands moved faster. But it wasn't landing like it used to, because the air had shifted. Chuck didn't move. Not once. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't a challenge. It was something older, something quieter. A presence that didn't ask for space. It simply occupied it. Then Travis crossed a line. He stopped in front of a boy named Jonah. Small, nervous, third week in class. The kid's kick was too high and his balance was off. Travis snapped at him to start over. Again. Jonah hesitated. Travis sneered just loud enough for the room to hear. Maybe your dad didn't teach you how to fall either. The words hung in the air. No one laughed. Chuck stood. Not fast, not loud, just enough movement to change the shape of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't walk forward. He didn't ask for permission. He just spoke. Are you the one who taught my son that pain is part of learning? Everything stopped. Even the fan overhead sounded quieter. Travis turned. Slowly. His mouth opened, but no words came. Chuck looked at him. Not with anger. Not with a threat. Just a question carried on years of silence and memory. The students didn't move. Not because they were told to stay still, but because they felt something ancient in that moment. A truth waiting to be spoken. Travis finally found his voice. It's part of discipline, he said. Pain teaches kids where the edge is. Chuck's head tilted just slightly. His eyes never left the man. No. Pain teaches fear if it comes without meaning. Travis stepped forward. You're saying I did something wrong. Chuck didn't answer right away. He let the question hang. Let the air settle again. Then he said it low and steady. You struck a boy for trusting his instincts. You humiliated a student for remembering something his father gave him. And now you speak like pain is a tool you've earned the right to use. Travis's jaw tightened. His stance widened just a little. Chuck stayed still. Then, almost gently, he said the second part. If you need pain to feel like a teacher, maybe you never learned what it means to lead. The silence cracked, not with sound, but with shift, like the room had let go of something it didn't realize it was holding. Donovan's eyes didn't move, but his breath did. Just one slow exhale. The students stayed frozen. No one needed to be told. They knew something sacred had happened, something old and true. Travis looked around the room. His authority didn't follow. Chuck sat back down. The stare down was over. But its weight stayed behind, and for the first time that evening, Travis had nothing left to say. Chuck stood again, slow and quiet, as if the floor itself had asked permission. His eyes moved over the line of students, not judging, just seeing. He paused on a young man near the end, probably in his 20s, tall and broad across the shoulders. Would you come here a moment? The student hesitated, then stepped forward with a short nod. He glanced at Travis, but Travis didn't speak. The room still held its breath. Chuck gave a small nod of thanks and stepped onto the mat. His boots were off now. He moved barefoot with the quiet grace of someone who knew how the ground should feel. He took his time, giving space, letting the rhythm of the room settle into something slower. Stand here, he said, motioning gently to the student. Just push forward nice and steady. No rush. The student nodded again, planted his feet, and reached out in a simple forward motion. Hands open. Chuck didn't resist. He turned slightly, catching the motion with his arm, not stopping it, but letting it roll across his body. He moved the way wind moves around a branch, never blocking, just guiding. The student stumbled forward, not from force, but from momentum left unchecked. Chuck stepped back. That's it. Now again. slower. The second time the student adjusted. His push had less edge. Chuck met him with even less. A soft turn of the wrist, a shift of the hips, and again the student moved past him without resistance. It looked simple, too simple. But something about it made people lean in. "He doesn't stop you," Chuck said to the class. "He just shows you where you're already going." The student smiled, a little embarrassed. Chuck smiled back, warm and calm. When you meet someone's force with your own, someone loses. Usually both do. But when you listen to the energy instead of fighting it, you both learn something. He paused. Then asked the student to try again, this time faster. The young man pushed harder, but Chuck barely moved. Just a pivot, a shift in weight, a roll of his shoulder. And again the push slipped away. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't strong, but it was clear. Chuck looked out at the others. What you just saw wasn't strength. It wasn't muscle. It was attention. He stepped aside, inviting the student to return to the line. Then he faced the group fully. You don't master someone else by controlling them. You master yourself by noticing where you tense up. You push too hard. Where do you stop listening? The students stood still watching. Some crossed their arms. Some let them fall. Everyone felt the difference. Control through force is temporary, Chuck said. It fades when your energy runs out. But if you can move with what's already happening, you last a lot longer. In the dojo, in a fight in life. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Chuck turned toward a shorter man in the back row. You step up. The man walked forward, eyes cautious but curious. Same drill. The man pushed forward. Chuck caught the motion, turned, and sent him gently off balance without lifting a finger in tension. The man caught himself blinking. That's not supposed to work, he muttered under his breath. Chuck smiled just a little. Most things that work best don't look like they should. The class chuckled, soft and unsure. Chuck let the quiet settle before continuing. We think strength is loud. That discipline means pain. That respect is earned through fear. But real strength is quiet. Real mastery feels like peace, even in the middle of chaos. He turned slightly, and for the first time, his eyes found Eli sitting near the far wall. Eli sat straight still as a stone, his hands resting on his knees. But his eyes were alive now. He didn't blink once. Chuck's voice softened. When you teach a child that pain is a part of learning, be sure you show them where it ends. Otherwise, they grow up thinking pain is the proof they're doing something right. The air in the dojo changed again. This time, it wasn't tension. It was something heavier, something more honest. One of the older students stepped forward without being called. Can you show us again? Chuck nodded. And he did. Again and again. Guiding, not blocking. Turning, not bracing. Letting the energy go where it already wanted to go just a little sooner. No one looked at Travis. Not anymore. They were watching something else now. Something that didn't need titles or rank to carry weight. Chuck Norris didn't demand respect. He just gave it to the room and waited to see who could hold it. And Eli, quiet, hurt, still holding the edge of that earlier slap, watched his father not win a fight, but shift the meaning of one. No force, no threats, just presence. And for the first time, the students began to wonder if everything they thought they knew about strength was only half the truth. Travis had been quiet too long. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from respect, but from something twisting underneath. His jaw moved slightly, grinding down the heat building in his chest. He stepped forward. "Let's give them something real." Chuck turned to him, calm as ever. His hands stayed at his sides. His eyes didn't narrow. They just waited. "You want to show a drill, fine," Travis said. "But if you're teaching movement, let's see it under pressure." The room froze again. A few students shifted their weight. No one spoke. Chuck didn't blink. "All right," he said. "Light contact only." Travis gave a stiff nod and stepped onto the mat. He rolled his shoulders once, then bounced lightly on the balls of his feet. His arms came up fast. Chuck didn't mirror him. He stepped in slowly. No stance. No guard. Just breathe and balance. They circled. Travis threw the first strike. A jab testing range. Chuck leaned slightly, letting it miss by inches. His feet didn't leave the ground. The second came faster. A low kick aimed at the thigh. Chuck turned with it just enough to rob it of power. His hand brushed the space where Travis's arm had been. Then another. A right hook this time. Sharp, intentional. Chuck leaned forward and let it slide past. His shoulder rolled under it like water moving around stone. Travis's breath caught. He came in harder. 3 quick shots. 1 to the chest, 1 to the ribs, 1 high. Chuck moved before they landed. Not fast, just precise. Each movement is smaller than the last, like he saw the space before it opened. He still hadn't raised his hands. Students leaned forward. No one even pretended to train anymore. Even Donovan stood still. Travis feinted, then went for the sweep. Chuck stepped over it, light as a leaf. His foot landed softly behind Travis's, but didn't hook it. He could have taken him down. He didn't. That was the first time Travis hesitated. Chuck stepped back, gave him room. A silent offer. "You still want this?" Travis surged forward. A flurry this time. Punch, elbow, quick knee to the side. Chuck turned with the storm never stopping it, never absorbing it. He let it pass like wind in a canyon. Then Travis found himself off balance. Nothing dramatic, just a lean too far forward a shoulder, too far extended. Chuck touched his wrist, guided it. And the next thing anyone knew, Travis was facing the wall. He hadn't fallen, but he'd lost the angle, the control, and everyone saw it. Chuck stepped away. "That's enough," he said. But Travis stayed where he was, breathing heavily. Not hurt, just rattled. Chuck looked at him, not with pride, not with pity, just understanding. "You fight like a man who's still trying to prove something." Travis turned his face red. His voice came tight. "And you fight like a ghost." Chuck gave the smallest nod. "That's closer than you think." The room was silent. No applause, no cheers. Just a long moment where no one wanted to break whatever had just happened. Chuck returned to his seat. The mat looked different now, not because of the movement, but because of the stillness he left behind. And Travis, still standing there, finally saw what the rest of the room had already figured out. Chuck hadn't come to take anything. He'd come to show what was missing. Travis couldn't stop. Something in him had cracked open, and now it was all momentum and pride and breath coming too fast. He swung again, not in control, not even aiming with purpose, just trying to land something that would bring the world back into balance. Chuck stayed where he was. He didn't block, didn't step back. His arms hung at his sides, body still and loose, like he wasn't part of the fight anymore. Or like he never was to begin with. Travis's footwork started to falter. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His punches got wider. His kicks lost shape. His breath rasped loudly in the room. Chuck barely moved. Every once in a while he shifted weight. A quiet step, a soft lean. Nothing more. It wasn't defense. It was present. The students stopped breathing. No one had to be told what was happening now. It was no longer a spear. It wasn't even a test. It was something else. Something personal. Travis growled as he lunged again, this time with his whole body behind it. Chuck stepped just far enough for the punch to pass, then returned to stillness. Again, and again, until Travis finally stumbled. He caught himself, glared, rushed again, fists clenched, eyes wild. But the more he pushed, the less Chuck gave him. There was nothing to fight, no target, no resistance. That's what broke him. He threw one more swing. It missed by too much. And this time, when his foot hit the mat, it stayed there. He bent over slightly, hands on his knees. His chest rose and fell in hard, ragged gasps. The fire was gone from his face. In its place was something else. Confusion, maybe. Exhaustion. Or the first crack of doubt. Chuck watched him for a long moment. Then he stepped forward. One slow pace. No tension, no power. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his face. He just looked at the man in front of him and spoke the 5 words. Still think pain builds character. The room stopped. It didn't go quiet. It had already been quiet. But this was deeper. Like the walls leaned in to listen. Like time pressed pause to see what would happen next. Travis didn't answer. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Not a word. Not a sound. The students looked at him, but they weren't really seeing him anymore. They were looking inward, into all the times they'd been told to toughen up, to take it, to bite down and push through into every bruise that was handed out as a lesson instead of a warning. Still think. Pain builds character. Chuck's voice echoed in more than one mind now. Eli sat against the wall, his eyes locked on his father. Not wide with pride, not glowing with victory, just still, deep, quiet. The question wasn't about Travis anymore. It was about all of them. Chuck stepped back. "That's enough for today," he said. His tone was soft. Not final, just clear. Master Donovan gave a small nod. No one else moved. It took almost 30 seconds before someone remembered to breathe. Travis stood up slowly, still facing the mat. He didn't meet anyone's eye. He didn't leave. But something in his shoulders had shifted. The fight was over not because he lost, but because something larger had taken its place. Chuck turned toward the bench. He didn't rush. He walked like he always did. Slow, grounded, easy. The room didn't return to normal. It wouldn't not after this. Because 5 quiet words had just cut through years of noise. The front door opened just after sunrise the next day. No one was expecting visitors. The mats were still being cleaned. The air still smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and rubber, and most students hadn't arrived yet. Only Master Donovan stood inside organizing gear near the front table, his steps quiet. She walked in like she had never left. Helen Tanaka didn't speak right away. She moved with the kind of calm that made people lower their voices without being asked. Her black hair streaked with gray was pulled back into a tight knot, and her canvas bag hung neatly from one shoulder. Donovan looked up. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. He bowed slightly, hands at his sides. She returned the gesture with a smaller one, like she didn't want to waste anything more than she needed. She scanned the room. The bench where Chuck had sat was empty now. A mop leaned against the far wall. There was a faint scuff on the mat near the center. It hadn't been cleaned off yet. Helen's eyes lingered there for a moment. What happened? Donovan paused. He didn't try to dress it up. We forgot who we were. She nodded. No surprise. Just sadness. And who reminded you? He met her gaze. A boy. And his father. Helen set down her bag and stepped onto the mat. Her shoes came off at the edge movements, precise, automatic. She walked to the center, crouched, and touched the faded scuff mark on the floor. Pain. Donovan hesitated. No, it never reached that. Not really. Helen closed her eyes for a breath. Travis. Yes, still here. No. Chuck came. Travis left without a word. Helen stood. Call the instructors. All of them. Donovan didn't ask why. By mid-morning, the senior students and coaches had gathered. No one knew what to expect. No one had seen Helen in nearly a year. Some thought she had retired. Others whispered she had stepped away after a family loss. She stood before them like a quiet storm. This dojo was never built on pain, she said. Not for fear. Not on hierarchy. She looked at each of them. I taught discipline, not dominance. I taught presence, not posture. I taught that strength begins when the ego ends. She turned to Donovan, and I let it slip because I left, because I thought it could hold itself up. Donovan shook his head. You trusted us. We just forgot how to carry the weight. Helen let that sit. Then she spoke with finality. Travis is suspended indefinitely. I don't care how long he's trained or how many tournaments he's won. A man who humiliates a child to prove a point has no business teaching. No one argued. Some shifted in their stance, uncomfortable but silent. Others looked at the floor, ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. A few nodded quietly. Helen continued. We will rebuild the culture. Not with slogans. Not with slogans painted on the wall, but with actions that mean something. She paused again. And we begin by learning from those who remind us of who we used to be. Later that afternoon, Chuck returned. He hadn't planned to. He had told Eli they'd come back in a few days, but something in his son's voice after class had stayed with him. "They're different now," Eli said. Chuck didn't ask for details. He just drove. Helen met him at the door. She offered a bow, a deep one, the kind that isn't about tradition, but about recognition. He bowed in return, but only slightly, enough to honor it, not make a show of it. She spoke first. "I owe you more than thanks, but I won't ask you to take over." Chuck looked at her, calm. "Good. I wouldn't have said yes." She smiled, just a flicker. "But maybe you'd consider teaching one class, a weekend session, something different, something slow." Chuck glanced around. The students were warming up, lighter than before, less rigid. He nodded. "Mindful strength," he said. Helen raised an eyebrow. "I like it." And that was it. The flyer went up 2 days later. No pictures, no bold colors. Just a plain sheet with the words, "Mindful Strength." Saturdays at 9. Led by Chuck. The first class had 6 students. By the second week there were 23. Some were regulars. Some hadn't been back in months. Some came just to see if the rumors were true. The mats felt different now. There was still sweat, still hard work, but the silence between movements carried weight again. Not fear, just intention. Chuck taught slowly. He never raised his voice, never rushed a drill. He spoke between breaths, sometimes not at all. He let people figure things out with their own bodies first, then gave a small correction that unlocked everything. Eli trained beside the others. Not in front, not behind, just there, present. No one ignored him now, not because of his father, but because of how he moved. He didn't talk much, but he smiled more, especially when he got something right without being told. One day after class, a young woman stayed behind. She waited until Chuck was putting away a bag of pads. Then she spoke softly. "Why don't you teach more?" Chuck looked at her. His voice came slowly. "Because if I did, you'd stop listening for yourself." She nodded, unsure if she understood, but she left feeling lighter anyway. That was the shift. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't loud, but it stayed. In the way students bowed when they entered. They spoke to each other between drills. How did they treat the space when no one was watching? Helen sat quietly one Saturday, watching from the back. Donovan sat beside her. "He's not trying to fix us," she said. "He's reminding us how to fix ourselves." Donovan nodded. "And we're listening again." Outside, the old oak tree rustled in the wind. Eli sat beneath it after class, his legs stretched out, hands behind his head. The sun filtered through the leaves. Somewhere nearby, a breeze picked up quiet and steady, like something settling back into place. Travis came back on a Wednesday morning. No one made an announcement. No one pointed or whispered. He just walked through the front door with a gym bag and a folded mat under one arm. He didn't head to the office or the instructor's bench. Instead, he set his bag down in the back corner and started laying out the floor pads. Quiet, steady, one row at a time, like he used to do years ago before he wore a black belt. Donovan saw him first. They locked eyes for a moment. No tension, no welcome, just acknowledgement. Travis gave a small nod. That was enough. He didn't speak to Helen. She didn't speak to him either. But she let him stay. that silence meant something too. He didn't correct anyone, didn't coach, didn't hover. He stood at the edge during warm-ups, arms folded loosely, eyes tracking the movements. Some students looked his way, unsure of how to feel. He didn't meet their stares. That afternoon, he helped put away equipment. He didn't rush, didn't wait to be asked, just moved. Chuck arrived the next day. He stepped onto the mat, gave his usual soft nod to the room, then noticed Travis by the wall. He didn't say anything, just looked at him. Travis returned the look. His jaw was set, but his hands weren't clenched. His stance was wide but not defensive. He stayed through class, watched the drills, took mental notes. When students paired up, he kept to himself. Then, without a word, he joined the end of the line during the final kata. He moved carefully. Not perfect. A step too tight. A strike too hard. But he followed. Chuck didn't correct him. Didn't praise him either. Just let him be there, no more, no less. Travis kept coming back. Every few days at first, then more often. He brought towels, filled water jugs, cleaned the mirrors when no one else noticed they were smudged. The younger students started asking him small things. What's the best way to tie the belt? What does this stance mean? He didn't always have the right answer, but he listened. More than he used to. Eli passed him once in the hallway. They didn't speak, but Travis stepped aside without being asked. Eli nodded as he walked by. That night, Travis stayed after class. He stretched on the back while Chuck packed up. After a long pause, he stood and walked over. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. He just said quietly that he'd be back next week, that he hoped it was still right to join. Chuck looked at him. "That's your choice," he said. Then he walked out into the night air. Travis stayed behind and turned off the lights. The first silent power class met on a Sunday morning just after sunrise. The dojo was quiet and the air was still cool from the night before. Light came in slowly through the tall windows, soft and warm across the mats. Chuck was already there. He didn't wear a uniform. Just loose pants and a plain shirt like someone preparing for a walk, not a lesson. His shoes were left by the door, lined up neatly beside a single folded towel. The students arrived in ones and twos. Most were older. Some had gray at their temples. Others moved with caution in their knees. A few wore old service jackets. One man carried a cane and sat on the edge of the bench, eyes alert. Chuck greeted them all with a small nod. No questions, no clipboard, no list of goals, just a gentle presence that said, "You're already enough for today." The class started slowly. They stood in a wide circle, feet bare on the mat, eyes forward. Chuck spoke softly as he moved between them. "Feel your weight, not where it should be, just where it is." The room settled. He led them through simple movements, nothing that required speed, just small shifts, a turn of the hips, a grounding of the feet, shoulders open, breath steady. They moved in silence. He didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. When someone tightened their jaw or lost rhythm, he would walk over and adjust them with 2 fingers on the spine or a tap on the elbow. One woman trembled slightly as she tried a balance step. Chuck knelt beside her, didn't speak. She just steadied her wrist and waited until she found it herself. Then he moved on. That's how it went. No drills, No shouting, no mirrors, just space to return to the body, and then slowly to the self. By the third week, more people came. A retired firefighter, a middle school teacher, a man who hadn't spoken much since his last deployment. They came for the quiet, and stayed for the way it felt to stand still and not be judged. Chuck showed them how to breathe. Not deep, not forced, just natural from the belly like sleep. Then he talked about the line between awareness and reaction, where instinct meets choice. One Sunday, a man asked him when they would learn to strike. Chuck looked at him and smiled just a little. "You are already, just not with fists." The man didn't answer, but he showed up early the next week. The class began to shift. Some brought their spouses. Others stayed after asking about posture or stretching. One woman started sitting outside the dojo after each session just to let her heart slow down before driving home. Chuck never rushed them. He answered questions with questions, offered corrections, not commands. When someone asked if he could lead 2 sessions a week, he said he'd think about it. He didn't want them to rely on him. He wanted them to remember themselves. On one morning, a soft rain tapped against the roof as they stood in silence, eyes closed. Chuck didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes, and no one moved. Not because they were waiting, but because the stillness felt like enough. Eli sat quietly at the edge that day, watching, listening, not training, just noticing. After class, a man walked up to Chuck and thanked him, not for what he taught, but for what he didn't say. Chuck nodded once. Sometimes the right silence is louder than a speech. And so the class kept growing, not in numbers, but in depth, in how people carried themselves when they walked back into the world. Straighter, softer, more awake. Silent power wasn't a class anymore. It was a way of remembering who you were before the noise. And for many, that was the real lesson. Eli had grown taller in the months since everything changed. His shoulders were still narrow, his voice still soft, but the way he carried himself was different now. He moved with steadiness, not to be seen, just to feel right in his own skin. The others had noticed. Not because he said much. He didn't. But because he always knew where to be. When to bow. When to pause. When someone needed help but hadn't asked yet. One afternoon, a new boy joined the class. He was small for his age, maybe 8, with anxious eyes and shoes that squeaked on the mat. He bowed too quickly, forgot to breathe during warm-ups, and fumbled every step of the first drill. Eli watched from across the room, not judging, just seeing. When the line rotated and the boy found himself alone near the back, Eli walked over. He crouched beside him and said something quietly. Then the move was demonstrated again, slower this time. The boy nodded, still stiff, but grateful. They worked side by side for the next few minutes. Eli didn't take over. He let the boy try. When the footwork faltered, he tapped the mat with one finger showing the angle. When the boy rushed, he smiled and said something the others couldn't hear. The boy started breathing easier. His steps weren't perfect, but they made sense now. He stopped looking at the instructor for approval. He started looking at Eli. Chuck stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, just watching. His face was calm, unreadable the way it always was. But when Eli gently corrected the boy's stance with an open palm and a nod, Chuck's eyes softened. From across the room, Travis saw it too. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, barely a movement, but it meant something. Eli didn't see it. He was focused on the boy in front of him, not the eyes around him. He kept the pace steady, encouraging, but never overbearing, like someone who remembered what it felt like to be on shaky ground. Later after class, the boy stayed behind to tie his shoes. Eli sat next to him in silence. Then, before leaving, the boy looked up and whispered something. Eli nodded. They stood together and walked toward the exit side by side. Chuck met them at the door. He looked at the boy, then at Eli. Then he placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder. Just 1 second. No words. Eli glanced up, then back down. He didn't say much that day. He didn't need to. What he gave the boy was the same thing he had once needed most. Not instruction, not praise, just a presence that said, "You're not alone." And somehow, without trying, that made him a teacher. The reporter showed up on a quiet Thursday afternoon. She was young, polite, carried a worn notebook, and had a curious smile. Said she was with the local paper and wanted to ask a few questions about the video. Chuck stood just outside the dojo, leaning against the railing with a thermos in one hand. He listened patient and still. He didn't interrupt, just let her finish her pitch. She said the clip had passed 1 million views. People were sharing it because of how calm he looked and how he handled conflict without striking. She said it felt like something people needed right now. Chuck gave a slow nod. Then I looked out toward the parking lot, which was quiet for a moment. He thanked her for coming. Said he wasn't interested in doing interviews. Said the story wasn't about him. The reporter blinked. She asked if he meant Eli or Travis or the dojo itself. Chuck turned back to her, voice steady. "It's about what people do when no one's filming. That's the story worth telling." She paused, writing something in her notebook, but her brows drew in slightly. She said most folks would be proud, that not many people handle things like that anymore, that maybe more folks should see what it looks like. Chuck didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He just said that moments like that are meant to be lived, not replayed. If someone learns something from a video, that's fine. But the real learning happens after the cameras are gone. She asked if he ever thought about what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. Chuck smiled. Not with his mouth, but in the eyes. He said legacy isn't built with clips. It's built into how you show up every day, how you treat the person no one's watching. How do you respond when there's nothing to gain? The reporter stood quiet for a moment, then nodded, closed her notebook, and thanked him. Chuck wished her well, said her job mattered more than she probably realized. Then they turned back toward the dojo. The doors were still open. The mats were waiting. Inside, a class was warming up, and Eli was helping tie someone's belt. The sun had started to dip low, casting long, soft shadows across the lot. Eli sat beneath the oak tree, his back pressed against the thick bark, knees pulled in just enough to rest his elbows. The wind moved through the branches, not loud, just steady, like it had all the time in the world. Chuck joined him without a word. He didn't ask if Eli wanted company. He didn't need to. He just lowered himself to the ground beside his son and let the quiet settle in. For a while they said nothing. They just watched the sky shift from gold to orange. Cars rolled by in the distance. Somewhere inside the dojo, a mop squeaked along the tile. Then Eli spoke. You didn't come because I got hit, did you? Chuck didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the sky. No, not exactly. Eli waited. I came because someone was trying to teach you the wrong idea about strength. Chuck looked down at his hands. And I know how fast that can stick. Eli turned his head slightly, not quite facing him. Like what? Like thinking pain makes you tougher, or that being loud makes you right, or that fear is the same thing as respect. Chuck let out a breath. I've seen people confuse the two for most of their lives. Eli picked at the grass by his shoe. But I didn't hit back. I know. Was that the right thing? Chuck turned toward him now. It was the honest thing. And that's harder. Eli nodded slowly. He didn't speak again for a minute. You weren't mad, I was, Chuck said. But not at you. He let the silence stretch. I was mad. Someone tried to shape you with shame. They used your mistake to make you feel bigger. Eli looked up. Were you ever afraid when you were young every day? Even when you were strong, especially then? That's when you're afraid of losing what you've learned. Eli leaned back against the tree. He didn't cry, but his throat tightened. Chuck looked at him and placed a hand gently behind his shoulder. Strength isn't something you show, son. It's something you carry. Quiet, like breath, like truth. Eli nodded again, slower this time. They sat a while longer. No lessons, no more words. Just a father and son under the same tree where a long journey had started, and where something stronger had finally taken root. Eli had gone quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that meant unsure. It was the kind that came when something deeper was turning over inside. He looked down at his shoes, then at his hands. Did you want to hit him? Chuck didn't pretend. Yeah, I did. Eli didn't look up. Even then, Chuck nodded. Especially then. That's when it's hardest not to. Eli picked at a bit of bark beside his leg. So why didn't you? Chuck leaned back against the trunk. Because I didn't need to. And because it wouldn't have changed the right thing. Eli frowned just a little. What's the right thing? Chuck thought for a moment. The right thing is reminding people what real power looks like. Not the kind that breaks things. The kind that holds the line without crossing it. Eli looked at him now. That's harder than it sounds. Chuck smiled, eyes soft. That's why most folks don't do it. They think strength's about making noise. But real strength is about not needing to. Eli was quiet again. He wasn't fidgeting now. He just let the words sit with him. He finally asked one more question. But what if someone deserves it? Chuck looked at him for a long time. That's when it matters most. When every part of you wants to strike and you stop anyway. That's when it stops being about them and starts being about you. Eli swallowed hard. He didn't answer, but he understood. Chuck leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. When you let anger lead, it always takes you someplace smaller. But when you let it pass, you leave room for something bigger. Like what? Like peace. Like self-respect. Like knowing you're still the one choosing. Chuck turned toward his son, his voice low but clear. The strongest strike is the one you choose not to throw. Eli sat with that. then nodded just once. The wind moved through the leaves above them. The branches swayed gently. A few old acorns rolled down near the roots, and under that old oak tree the world felt still. Not quiet because it had to be. Quiet because nothing more needed to be said.